Again today with politics and religion. You better hang on because this is going to be a fast and sharp-turning event today. Now, previously about politics and religions, I have said these things. Let me get back to where I want to be, there. I have talked about having a global perspective when you vote, to think not just about what is good for us, but to think about what is good for all as you choose policies and candidates that you vote for. I've also said that we need to be environmentally aware of things, to be concerned about the issues of the environment, which are not coming up in our political debate at all, and yet which control every aspect of our lives. Today, voting like a Christian is about care for the little ones. Today I am going to say this to you, that you should vote for policies and candidates that work to care for the little ones. The poor, the weak, the oppressed, the disabled, the foreigner, etc., etc. But let me explain. The first reading today is from the book of Ruth, and it was suggested to me by Simon Peter, who was praying about whether or not this ought to be his church and his home community. And in his prayer, he got an answer from God, and the answer came with this passage of Scripture in which Ruth says to her mother-in-law, "I will be with you. Your people will be my people, your God, my God." And Simon Peter talked to me about that and said that's how he feels about things as far as our congregation is concerned. He wanted to make it clear that he felt that he was called here. Now, this story about Ruth and Naomi, life circumstances have been hard for them. Naomi moved because of marriage to a foreign country. There she had her sons married foreign daughters, foreign to her, she was the foreigner. And when her sons died, she determined to go back to her homeland, and Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go back to your land, find yourself husbands." But Ruth said, "No, I'm going to come with you and go with you and be with you." The only way, however, when Ruth and Naomi got back to their own homeland, the only way they could survive was by what is known as gleaning. Now, in the Old Testament, in the Bible, we read this law that if you are a landowner, when your crops come in, you should not harvest them all. You should leave some. Just leave it there on the land, let it be there, so that the poor of your community could come and pick that and take those pieces. And that was called gleaning. It was one of the original welfare systems, one way that they could care for the poor. And this is what Ruth had to do. The only way she could survive, because they had no land, no property, in that time, of course, women couldn't hold jobs or own property. They were completely dependent on men. So two women without men had very little that they could do. So they went and they gleaned. They found food where they could find it. And Ruth found food in the field of a man named Boaz. And Boaz apparently was a good man who was very careful to always leave some of the crop for the poor to have, to always leave some behind. And he happened to notice Ruth working in his field. He noticed that she was beautiful, and he also noticed that he heard what she had done, how she had been so faithful to her mother-in-law. And so he decided that he would take her under his wing. And they eventually became married, and they eventually had a child, and that child had a child, and that child turned out to be none other than the great King David, the greatest of the heroes of ancient Israel. If they had not had a policy, if Boaz had not cared about the poor people in his community, he would have never met her. King David would have never been born. It's one of the points of the story of the book of Ruth. For Ruth and Naomi, like for immigrants today, when they come to the United States, people who come here seeking asylum, refugees who have come from somewhere else, get nothing. They come here and they have nothing. They're not allowed to work. They get no support from the government. They get nothing at all. And it was similar to that for Ruth and Naomi, except Ruth and Naomi were able to at least glean. One of the things that we need to remember is there are among us poor who need to be cared for. And who is littler than the foreigner or the sojourner, or the poor person, or the widow, or the orphan. These are the little people of the Bible, the little ones that we are told we should care for. Often the words for who the small ones were, who they were, was the words the widow and the orphan. It meant anybody who was struggling to make it in the system. And who are the little ones today? Who are the little ones today in our society? Who are those who are on the edge, who struggle? Who are they?
Single mothers and their children.
Single mothers and their children.
Addicts.
Addicts. Wow, yeah. Who else? Bob?
Veterans of foreign wars.
Yeah, veterans. Yeah. Who else are the little ones in our society? The homeless. The disabled. What was that, Ray? The elderly. Yeah. There are many around us, many people around us. And right here in this neighborhood, how far would you have to walk from this church to find one of the little ones for whom we should care? How far do you think you'd have to walk?
Probably across the street.
Across the street. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I'm trying to remember. JR says you don't even have to get out of your seat, because there's little ones right here among us for whom we are supposed to care. And this is not a new idea. This is an old idea. Boaz lived about 1,000 years BC. And there was another young man back in that time. His name was Isaiah, and he was one of the elite. Isaiah was one of those who was on top of things. He was well educated. He had been cared for. He was male. He had money. He had position. He was a priest. And yet he also had a vision. And in his vision, he said he saw a God who said to him, I do not care about your religious practice. In other words, of saying it to us today, I don't care about the fact that you go to church every Sunday and that you give $17,000 a week to the church. I don't care about that. Here's what I care about. Well, here's what I care about. Isaiah 1:15 through 7. Read this with me. When you extend your hands, I'll hide my eyes from you. Even when you pray for a long time, I won't listen. Your hands are stained with blood. Wash, be clean, remove your ugly deeds from my sight. Put an end to such evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Help the oppressed. Defend the orphan. Plead for the widow. What Isaiah is saying to people is not, don't practice your religion. And I'm not saying to you, don't come to church, and I'm not saying don't support the church. What I am saying to you is this is what we're called to do. This is what the essence of our religion is. And if we are practicing a religion without compassion, we are failing, because we are called to care for the little ones. And one of the things we can be pleased with at this church is we do that here. We try to do that. There is more we can do, and there is much, much more that needs to be done. But we're working on that. We must keep that central in our faith. We must remember that there are little ones among us, and it is our task to care for them. And while we're talking about little ones, let's talk about an actual little person. I realize you can't see that. That's a person, not an animal up in that tree. There's a story in the Bible of Jesus who is walking through a town, Jericho, and he comes across an actual little person. He comes across a man named Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus is... Ruth, Zacchaeus is... Thank you. How many of you know that Zacchaeus is a wee little man? Some of us learned that song in Sunday school. Zacchaeus is actually a small person. He might be. He might be. We don't know. We just know that he was below the average of stature. He was small enough that when Jesus came through the town and the crowds lined up to see him, Zacchaeus couldn't see him, and Zacchaeus had to climb a tree in order to see Jesus and to look down at him. And the amazing thing is, as Jesus passes through that town, Jesus stops under that tree and looks up and says, Zacchaeus, come down. I want to go to your house. I want to stay at your house. What is remarkable about that? He is a sinner. Zacchaeus is a sinner. Ask anybody in Jericho, and they will tell you, oh, Zacchaeus? Oh, he's a sinner. And you can imagine that maybe Zacchaeus just tried to edge through the crowd to get up front so he could get out in front of the tall people standing in front of him. And can you imagine them just making sure Zacchaeus can't get through? Because they don't like him, because he's a sinner. He's a tax collector. And that's even worse in their time than it is in ours. Zacchaeus collected taxes for the Romans who were in occupation of Israel, and they considered him not only a tax collector, but a traitor and a sinner, as bad as it gets. And when Jesus picked Zacchaeus out of all the people in the town, Jesus was recognizing something that they did not. Here was a man who maybe even was disabled and who was hated. And who is smaller than the person who is hated? What makes people smaller than hatred does? What happens to that person who comes into a community and finds out that for whatever reason everybody else in that community hates them? That's as little as you can get. And if you've ever been one of those people who were bullied or pushed or excluded or ostracized, you know what it is to be little. And if Jesus was going to pass through Jericho, you know who he was going to look for to spend time with? The littlest person he could find. And in this case, he found an actual little person. And that would be a remarkable story if it didn't happen over and over and over and over in Jesus' time. He cared for the little ones. So, having said all that, you have an opportunity in front of you to vote very soon. 9 days? 9 days? And one of the things you have to do if you are going to vote like a Christian is you have to vote for people and policies who care for the little ones. Would you like me to tell you who those people are and what those policies are? Too bad. I'm not going to do that because it just opens up another controversy. What's important to me is not so much that you get it right, but that you understand that that is your responsibility. It is your responsibility as a follower of Jesus to vote for people and vote for policies that seek to care for the little ones. And not all people and not all policies are there. But that is what Jesus calls us to do. Jesus did not knock on the door of the wealthiest person in Jericho. Jesus stopped under the tree of the littlest person in Jericho. And Boaz did not go out and find himself the wealthiest wife he could find, but he cared about the poor in his community and found his wife among them. And Isaiah says, your religion means nothing if you aren't caring for the little ones. And that's our responsibility. When we vote, care for the little ones. Amen.
You've been listening to a sermon by Reverend Stephen Carnahan, pastor of High Street Congregational Church in Auburn, Maine. If you feel inspired by what you hear, we invite you to join us in person for worship services every Sunday morning, beginning at 10 o'clock. Of course, you can always listen to Steve's sermons on the web. New sermons are posted every Monday by midday. Please take a moment to explore this website for more information about our church, or visit our Facebook page at High Street Congregational Church, UCC. We hope that God's presence will be known to you every hour of every day, and that God's blessings will rest upon you now and always. See you next week.